for your presence here. Admiral Daniel Cooper, Under Secretary for Benefits. Admiral, good to see you again. We have the Under Secretary for Memorial Affairs, Mr. William Turk. Mr. Turk, there you are, Mr. Turk. Good to see you. We also have the Honorable Paul Hutter, our General Counsel of the VA, the Honorable Robert Henke, Assistant Secretary for Management, and Mr. Henke, and then the Honorable Robert Howard, Assistant Secretary for Information Technology. Thank you all for being here. I think it's also appropriate to mention that this is National Salute to Hospitalized Veterans Week, and one of the things that I'm proud of is that this committee, working together on a bipartisan basis last year, showed our respect to veterans, not just with our words, but with our deeds as well. And it was a privilege for us to be a partner with you in that effort. Last year, we were able to increase funding for veterans by $11.8 billion. That's $5.5 billion more than was requested by the administration, and it represents the largest funding increase in the 77-year history of the department. What does that mean to veterans? It means increased health services. It will mean our veterans will wait less time to receive the benefits they've earned and the doctor's appointments they need. It will mean that Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom veterans will be screened for PTSD and traumatic brain injury, including the non-visible forms of TBI. And it will mean that the Department of Veterans Affairs will be able to address a significant backlog in facilities maintenance and ensure that our veterans are cared for in a safe and healthy environment. I would like to take this opportunity to again thank our former ranking member, now Senator Wicker, for all of his leadership and our work together last year. And again, thank all the members of this subcommittee, Democrat and Republican alike, who have worked on such a nonpartisan basis. The budget request for fiscal year 2009 totals $44.7 billion in discretionary spending and an additional $46.2 billion in mandatory spending. On the discretionary side of the ledger, the amount requested represents an increase of $1.7 billion over the fiscal year 2008 appropriations when you consider the additional emergency funding that was included in the FY08 bill. I want to salute the administration for requesting significant increases in medical services accounts, but I do have concerns about very large cuts for VA research and VA construction, both minor and major construction. I do have a number of questions. I'm sure we all do. Some of those that I have include how the VA is dealing with what we're seeing across the country, whether it's in DOD or the private sector, high inflation rates for construction. How is that impacting our construction program and budgets? Questions about whatever level of confidence the department has and its estimates in regards to the OEF, OIF populations in our hospitals. I know that's not an exact science. It's always a difficult, challenging process to estimate. And inflation rates for the department in other areas such as health care. Are our budgets, while going up on paper, actually allowing us to keep up with health care inflation and continue to improve services for our veterans? Mr. Secretary, we very much look forward to hearing your testimony in a moment, but at this point I'd like to, before I recognize you, I'd like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Wamp, for any comments that he would care to make.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I know we have a lot of witnesses and a lot of testimony to listen to, but I just want to say briefly this week what I said at my first hearing last week, and that is the highest honor and greatest privilege of my adult life outside of my family is to be a part of serving those who have served or are serving in uniform for our armed forces. This is an extraordinary privilege, and I do compliment the chairman, the new majority, this committee on the work that was done last year on both military construction and Veterans Affairs. The new baseline was established because of your strong advocacy, Mr. Chairman, and the President acknowledged that in the 09 budget request, and I do share your concerns with aspects of the budget request, but do compliment both the new majority last year for their commitment to these programs and the administration request for 09 as we are setting some new standards, I think, for these programs. I think reforms are needed, continuing reforms at the Veterans Administration. Mr. Secretary, thank you for the courtesy of coming by to see me and to everyone at this dais, particularly Undersecretary Turk, who's been to my district long before he knew I would be sitting in this chair. So I thank you for your personal attention and for what you do. And with that, let's get on with the testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the courtesies all along the way.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Wamp. Mr. Young, I always want to give you the opportunity as a leader on defense and veterans issues and former chairman of our full committee and now ranking member of the defense subcommittee, an opportunity to make any opening comments you'd care to make.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you so very much. And I want to echo what my friend Mr. Wamp said. We appreciate the way that you conduct this chairmanship and this subcommittee, and your dedication to our veterans is unchallenged, and I appreciate that so very much. I have the privilege of representing one of the greatest VA hospitals in the whole system, and that's at Bay Pines. But I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to say a personal welcome to General Peak. We go back a long way, and we have talked about a lot of things, but I just want to mention one of those opportunities that we had to be together when our adopted Marine son, Josh, was shot in Kuwait. And General Peak, as Surgeon General of the Army, was one of the surgeons who saved his life.
My goodness.
And shortly thereafter, after Josh had recovered, and well, it wasn't shortly thereafter, Josh was in the hospital for 6 months. I took Josh to a dedication of a Fisher House at Landstuhl Hospital in Germany. And sure enough, General Peak was there, and Josh was there in uniform. And I can tell you that the emotion of that moment when the two greeted each other was something that I can't really describe. But it'll always be in my heart forever, General Peak, and I just thank you for that, and I thank you for your willingness to take on this job. You know, as we discussed earlier, this is a massive bureaucracy, the Department of Veterans Affairs. There are some problems. We want to be your helper. We want to be available to provide you with whatever you need to take care of our veterans. And if we don't take care of our veterans, we haven't taken care of our country. And so, General, you know the strong personal feeling that I have for you, and I just really appreciate you. And I talked to Josh last night, told him that I was going to see you today, and he asked me to extend his best wishes also to you. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to make those personal comments about General.
Thank you, Mr. Young. And Secretary Peak, I was going to go through a rather lengthy bio of your accomplishments, but I think Chairman Young's comments are the best, most genuine introduction anyone could ever offer you. Thank you for your 38 years of service to the military and now your continuing service to our country. And we're honored to have you and like to recognize you for your opening comments now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With your permission, sir, I have a written statement that I would like to submit for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Congressman Wamp, Chairman Young, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I am honored to be here as the 6th Secretary of Veterans Affairs and now responsible for the care of our veterans. I appreciate the opportunity that the President has given to make a difference. With me today to present the 2009 budget is the VA leadership of this department, and you've already introduced them, and it is indeed a great crew. I couldn't be more pleased with the people I've got to work with, and many I've known for a long time. In my almost 2 months at VA, I've seen both the compassion and the professionalism of our employees. It is, frankly, just what I expected. The culture is one of deep respect for the men and women we serve, and this group at the table and the VA at large understands that America is at war and it is not business as usual. I appreciate the importance of, and I look forward to working with this committee to build on VA's past successes, but also to look at the future to ensure veterans continue to receive timely, accessible delivery of high-quality benefits and services earned through their sacrifice and service, and that we meet the needs of each segment of our veterans population. The President's request totals nearly $93.7 billion, $46.4 billion for entitlement programs and $47.2 billion for discretionary programs. The total request is $3.4 billion above the funding level for 2008, and that funding level includes the $3.7 billion plus up from the emergency funding. This budget will allow VA to address the areas critical to our mission, and that is providing timely, accessible, and high-quality health care to our highest priority veterans. We will advance our collaborative efforts with the Department of Defense to ensure continued provision of world-class service and an interoperable electronic medical record system. We will improve the timeliness and accuracy of claims processing and ensure the burial needs of our veterans and their eligible family members are met and maintain veteran cemeteries as national shrines. The young men and women in uniform who are returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and their families represent a new generation of veterans. Their transition and reintegration into our civilian society when they take that uniform off is a prime focus. Those seriously injured must be able to transition between DoD and VA systems as they move on their journey to recovery. This budget funds our polytrauma centers and sustains the network of polytrauma care that Dr. Cussman and his team have put in place. It funds the federal recovery coordinators envisioned by the Dole-Cerlela Commission report and sustains the ongoing case management at all levels of our system. We know that our prosthetic support must keep pace with the newest generation of prostheses as our wounded warriors transition into the VA system, and you will see a 10% increase in our budget for this. In 2009, we expect to treat about 333,000 OEF and OIF veterans. That's a 14% increase. With the potential of rising cost per patient, and we've seen some of that, we have budgeted a 21% increase to make sure that we can cover those costs. That is nearly $1.3 billion to meet the needs of OIF and OEF veterans that we expect will come to the VA for medical care. This budget will sustain our outreach activities that have ranged from more than 800,000 letters to the 205,000 engagements that our Vet Center outreach personnel have made with returning National Guard and Reserve units as part of the post-deployment health reassessment process. VBA alone has conducted more than 8,000 military briefings to nearly 300,000 servicemen and women. This is also part of seamless transition. With the authority to provide care for 5 years now for service-related issues, we can, without bureaucracy, offer the counseling and support and care that might be needed to avert or mitigate future problems. I highlight the outreach because we want these young men and women to get those services. Mental health, from PTSD to depression to substance abuse, are issues that I know are of concern to you, and they are of great concern to us. This budget proposes $3.9 billion for mental health access across the board, 9% increase from 2008. It will allow us to sustain an access standard that says if you show up for mental health, you will be screened within 24 hours, and within 14 days you will have a full mental health evaluation if needed. It will keep expanding mental health access according to a uniform mental health package, train mental health professionals in our CBOCs, and there are 51 new CBOCs coming on for 2009, in addition to the 64 that are coming on in 2008. Our vet centers will bring on yet an additional 100 OIF, OEF counselors, and Dr. Cussman is prepared, as need is identified, to add additional vet centers. We appreciate the issues of rural access in this arena, and our vet centers are budgeted for 50 new vans to be able to support remote access, as well as expanding telemental health in 25 locations. But this budget and our mission is more than just about those most recently returning servicemen and women. We should remember that 20% of VA patients, who in general are older with more comorbid conditions than our general population, have a mental health diagnosis. In fiscal year 2007, we saw 400,000 veterans of all eras with PTSD. This budget will sustain VA's internationally recognized network of more than 200 specialized programs for the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder through our veterans medical centers and our clinics that serve really all of our veterans. We have a unique responsibility to serve those who have served before. You know, we still have one World War I veteran. One died about a week or so ago. The World War II and Korean veterans are recipients of our geriatric care, and our efforts in improving long-term care, non-institutional care, where in this budget we have increased our funding by 28%, it will make a huge difference in their quality of life. We have currently 32,000 people served by home telehealth programs. This budget continues our work in this area and in the expansion of home-based primary care. Another facet of this complex problem is the issue of homeless veterans. Under this budget, our grant and per diem program continues to grow. We'll have 13,000 grant and per diem beds funded by 2009. Our work with HUD for permanent housing vouchers continues, which we will support with case managers. And it sustains the 11 domiciliary facilities that have been coming online over the last 3 years, such that by 2009, we'll be up to about 10,000 domiciliary beds with substance abuse treatment embedded, with many serving otherwise homeless veterans. Our most recent study looking at homeless vets in particular shows a downward trend of about 20%, from 195,000 on any given night to 154,000. Still too many, but real evidence of progress. What many don't know is that we provide a good deal of health care to homeless veterans, $1.6 billion in 2007, and we anticipate $1.9 billion in 2009. Overall, the President's 2009 budget request includes a total of $41.2 billion for VA medical care, an increase of $2.3 billion over the 2008 level and more than twice the funding available at the beginning of the Bush administration. With it, we will provide quality care, improve access, and expand special services to the 5,771,000 patients we expect to treat in 2009. That's 1.6% increase above our current 2008 estimates. In April of 2006, there were over 250,000 unique patients waiting more than 30 days for their desired appointment dates. That's not acceptable. As of January 1, 2008, we'd reduced the waiting list to just over 69,000. Still not where we want to be. Our budget request for 2009 provides the resources to virtually eliminate the waiting list by the end of next year. Information technology cross-cuts this entire department, and this budget provides more than $2.4 billion for this vital function. That's 19% above our 2008 level. And it reflects the realignment of all IT operations and functions under the management control of our Chief Information Officer. A majority, $261 million of the increase in IT, will support VA's medical care programs, particularly VA's electronic health record. I emphasize it here because it is so central to the care we provide, touted in such publications as the book Best Care Anywhere as the key to our quality that is lauded worldwide. This IT budget also includes all the infrastructure support, such as hardware and software and communication systems, to include those 51 new CBOCs that I mentioned. And there is $93 million for cybersecurity, continuing us on the road to being the gold standard. IT will also be key as we begin to move our claims model down the road to a paperless process. It is an investment that we must make. This budget sustains the work in VetsNet that is giving us really management data to get after our claims issues, as well as supporting our virtual VA, our electronic data repository. In addition to IT, this budget sustains a 2-year effort to hire and train 3,100 new staff to achieve a 145-day goal for processing compensation and pension claims in 2009. This is a 38-day improvement from 2007 and a 24-day or 14% reduction from what we expect this year. This is important because the volume of claims receipt is projected to reach 872,000 in 2009. That's a 51% increase since 2000. The active reserve and National Guard returning from OEF, OIF have contributed to an increased number of new claims, but also bring with them an increased number of issues per claim. And this chart, I think, shows that, with the top line being issues per claim, each one of which has to be adjudicated separately and rated, while the claims you can see growing. And I think it's remarkable that Admiral Cooper has been able to keep that average days to complete relatively constant, even in the face of that extensive growth. We want to do better than what we're doing. The President's 2009 budget includes 7 legislative proposals totaling $42 million. One of these proposals expands legislative authority to cover payment for special residential care and rehabilitation in medical foster homes for OIF, OEF veterans with TBI. We again bring you a request for enrollment fees for those who can afford to pay and for a raise of the copays. Again, this does not affect our VA budget, just as last year, as the funds will return to the Treasury. That is $5.2 billion over about 10 years. It does reflect the matter of equity for those veterans who have spent a full career of service and under TRICARE do pay an annual enrollment fee for like care. The $442 million to support VA's medical research and medical and prosthetic research program, The less than we have had from the augmented 2008 budget is actually a little more than 7% above what we received in 2006 and what we asked for in 2007 and 8. It does contain $252 million devoted to research projects focused specifically on veterans returning from service in Afghanistan and Iraq, including projects in TBI and polytrauma, spinal cord injury, prosthetics, burn injury, pain, post-deployment mental health. In fact, we anticipate with federal and other grants a full research portfolio of about $1.85 billion. This budget request includes just over $1 billion in capital funding for VA, with resources to continue 5 medical facility projects already underway in Denver, Orlando, Lee County, Florida, San Juan, and St. Louis, and to begin 3 new medical facility projects at Bay Pines, Tampa, and Palo Alto, 2 of which relate to our polytrauma rehab centers and continue our priority in this specialized area of excellence. Finally, we will perform 111,000 interments in 2009. That's 11% more than in 2007. The $181 million in this budget for the National Cemetery Administration is 71% above the resources available to the department's burial program when the President took office. These resources will operationalize the 6 new national cemeteries that will open this year, providing a VA burial option to nearly 1 million previously unserved veteran families, and will maintain our cemeteries as national shrines that will again earn the highest marks in government or private sector for customer satisfaction. This budget of nearly $93.7 billion, nearly double from 7 years ago, and with a health care component more than twice what it was 7 years ago, will allow us to make great progress in the care of all of our veterans and will keep us on this quality journey in health, in management of an extraordinary benefit, and in ensuring excellence of our final tribute to those who shall have borne the battle. Sir, it's an honor to be with you, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your excellent opening statement. Mr. Wamp, let me ask you, we've got 4 minutes and 37 seconds on the vital vote on whether or not we're going to adjourn on the floor of the House. I can miss that vote, but I don't want to ask any others to miss it. Would you want to go vote and I can ask my questions while you're gone, or do you want to continue on? How would you like to proceed?
I'm concerned that this vote's going to be followed by other votes on the floor, and I think that I need to go, and I would always want to try to accommodate you if you want to stay, but I think this vote is going to be followed by other substantive votes.
Well, maybe what we could do is we could do a tag team here. Some members have gone to vote. I'll go ahead and go through my initial questions while you're voting, and then if it turns out they're not having additional votes, then come back and maybe you could begin while I'm gone. Would that be okay? I'm a little bit concerned. We're having a series of procedural votes today, and because of Mr. Lantos's funeral, we already cut the time for this hearing in half, so I'm a little worried. So if you don't object to that, we would proceed ahead. Is that?
Mr. Young will stay, and I'll vote, and that way we're covered.
Okay, then we can have someone here perhaps at all times if I have to slip away for some votes.
Is there going to be a 5-minute vote? Do we know if there is a 5-minute?
Is it a 5-minute vote? Okay, if I could ask staff to check and see, there'll be a substantive vote after this, and if it's a 5-minute vote, then we might have to recess for a few moments to go cast that vote. Mr. Secretary, let me just begin by asking you, there were legitimate concerns about the fact that given that the VA received so much additional funding last year for both supplemental as well as the 08 budget year, that and the fact that those dollars did not come initially on October 1 at the beginning of the new fiscal year, that the VA might have a difficult time putting in place a plan to spend that money efficiently and effectively. Could you just make some observations about how you feel in terms of the VA's plans for implementing the budget that we passed and the President signed recently? Do you feel comfortable in how you have those resources allocated? And perhaps I should ask whether you think there could be sooner rather than in the last quarter of the year requests for reprogramming in order to allow you to use that money most efficiently.
Yes, sir. I think that we will be coming forward to talk about shifting some of that money around a little bit to make sure that we can use it most effectively. I do think that we have a good plan in place to be able to execute that in what I've been able to see so far. Some of it is going to be, things that don't require an ongoing sustainment. They're sort of one-timers as well. So, and I think we can get those executed. But I think that we also have in this budget the ability to sustain the things that will have an out-year tail to them.
Right. In regard to reprogramming, let me just say that this subcommittee would want to do careful due diligence and reviewing those requests from the VA to be sure they reflect the priorities that the Congress has set in its budget. But at the same time, I'd urge you to not have the department wait until second or third week of August to ask for that reprogramming. We understand you got a great deal of new funding and you got it late in the process. So given that process wasn't perfect, we know there may be some adjustments. And bottom line to us is that those adjustments be made whenever it can best help the most number of veterans.
And we will not be waiting until August. We will be up here soon.
Okay, great. Mr. Young?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. General, when the casualties began coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, the military hospitals were pretty much overwhelmed. I remember seeing hospital beds in the hallways. But what happened was that great influx of wounded heroes eventually came to the VA system. And all of a sudden, you were pretty much overwhelmed in a lot of places, especially your polytrauma centers. A lot of these young men and women swore to us, to me, to others, that we don't have any kind of a post-traumatic stress problem at all. And I think they were wrong. And I think they're going to find out. And I think the VA system is learning now that they might have felt that way when they came from Walter Reed or Bethesda, but that as the time went on, they did develop the problems. Now, my question has to do with, do you have enough personnel in the VA system to deal with post-traumatic stress disorders? Are you able to give your patients sufficient time with a psychologist or a psychiatrist? Or do you need more psychologists and psychiatrists? And which is probably, the answer is probably yes, because I know that time has been rationed for some of these cases. What do you need? What can we do? What can this Congress do to help our veterans by providing them the appropriate care for their post-traumatic stress situations?
Well, sir, first let me comment about the great assistance we have had from the Congress in a couple of ways. One is giving us the money to move forward with the mental health strategic plan that Dr. Cussman put in place back in 2004 that started laying out the groundwork for what we needed to start to grow. We've got better than 10,000 in the VA in terms of mental health professionals. And if you look at all of the people that we've got working in the mental health arena, it approaches 17,000 focused just on mental health. Part of the issue is being able to hire people in different places. I mean, rural America has a challenge, and that's why I was pleased to find the 25, the fact that we are already budgeting 25 new telemental health access points. I think we did 43,000 mental health telemedicine consults last year or something like that. So I mean, there are challenges to being able to find the psychologists and the psychiatrists where you need them. The ability to pay more and pay closer to going rates that has been authorized is, as I understand it, made a difference, and so we're seeing less attrition of some of those folks than what we have seen in the past. But there's no question that it's a subsegment of really a national issue of having enough mental health workers across this country.
General, I know that the American Red Cross has a program of working with medical doctors, surgeons, to work to volunteer their time in military hospitals. And I've met a number of these doctors who are there gratis under the sponsorship of the Red Cross. Do you have a similar program in the VA system?
So let me ask Dr. Cussman, because I actually don't know the answer to that.
We have people can volunteer as Red Cross volunteers in the same manner that you just described to provide services. And so on a case-by-case basis, we'll take advantage of that.
Does that include psychologists and psychiatrists?
Yes, sir, I believe that's true.
Let me go back to my question. Do we need to do anything? Do we need to do anything to help you fill this need?
So I don't have a good answer of a specific requirement. I think right now we've budgeted the money. Part of the issue of PTSD, I think, is breaking down the stigma. We're working on that with our vet centers, and we're going to expand that by bringing in OIF, OEF people to work in our vet centers. It starts to give the younger service member a chance to identify somebody that's really of their own age group and their own experience set. The other thing that I want to be able to do is more in the way of outreach and try to get folks in. The opportunity to be able to have access to our system for 5 years after returning from overseas, I think is a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to get somebody in, and even if they to try to avert the potential for problems down the road. We are working with the post-deployment health reassessment, so we've got to really link in with the military, because that's really our feeder organization, if you will. Mike, did you have another comment?
Yes, sir. As the Secretary said, we were aggressively hiring people. We've been quite successful in that. We've hired in the last 2 years 3,800 new mental health people, including social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists. One of the issues of the stigma of mental health is that people don't want to come, or they don't want to come to a mental health clinic. And so what we've initiated is a very thorough and aggressive program of integrating mental health into primary care, where the individual might be more comfortable going to a primary care clinic with their backache or their knee ache, but really the real reason they need to come is for their mental health, and that's been very successful as well. So a lot of initiatives to try to break down the barriers.
Well, I think I really appreciate what you just said, Doctor. Week before last, Beverly and I visited the Wounded Warrior Battalion, the Marine Battalion at Camp Pendleton. And we had an opportunity to visit with some of the Marines who were there rehabilitating that we had actually been with when they were at Bethesda, when they first came from the war zone. And I remember that, excuse me, that when they left Bethesda, they were determined. I don't have any mental or emotional problems, but a couple of years later, being there at Camp Pendleton in the Wounded Warrior Battalion, they finally admitted that, yes, I do need help. And these young guys are going to be coming to you very shortly in your system. So I do worry, and I do want to do anything that we can to make sure that when they get to your system, that they're taken care of, because it is, I think, is going to be a more serious requirement even than we recognize today. So, but thank you very much for what you do, and I just appreciate the chance to see you again, and thank you for all of your service to the Army and to the Department of Veterans Affairs and our heroes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before we recognize Mr. Farr for his questions, one other person I'd like to take the privilege of introducing who's not at the front table, but who's been a tremendous leader for the VA, and that's Deputy Secretary Gordon Mansfield. Secretary Mansfield, I want to especially thank you for taking over the reins as Acting Secretary of the VA during a very important time when we were discussing large increases in the VA budget. That was a challenging process, and thank you for your leadership in that role and for your continuing leadership as Deputy Secretary. We're honored to have you here today. Thank you. Mr. Farr?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a delight to begin this year of appropriations hearing, and especially thank you for upgrading the room that we're in.
Don't get used to it.
Mr. Secretary, as I read the budget, I see that the President has again cut the VA construction budget to half of what was appropriated in FY08. And I'm sure you're aware that California has the longest list of potential major construction projects, and if you add them up, they exceed the total proposed for the budget in all VA construction. So as a concerned Californian, particularly one that has been trying to really reach out to this expanded veteran community in the greater Monterey Bay area, I'm wondering if you're aware of a major construction project in the out years at the former Fort Ord, which would serve as a community-based outreach clinic for underserved veterans. And I wondered if you were aware of it, and two, that in those, if you will pledge to make sure that in those out years planning and those FIDEP type things that there's adequate funding for this project at Fort Ord, for the VA DOD clinic, joint clinic there.
Well, sir, I don't know the specifics of that clinic specifically or where it is in the out year, but I am a proponent of DOD VA sharing. I've been to that clinic on Monterey before, so I know that area some, and I've also walked the grounds of the old Fort Ord. So I am familiar with the area and the environment, and I would certainly look to making sure that we can serve our veterans in the most effective and efficient way possible there.
Well, if you walked it, that's incredible because it's 40 square miles, and that's. But I think you're aware that it was the largest military base ever closed in a BRAC round, and there's certainly a lot of opportunity that the land is still in federal ownership.
Yes, sir.
To use it for VA efforts. And in that, part of that land's been set aside and designated as a cemetery. And Mr. Chirk's been out there, wonderful meeting out there with everybody, and he certainly recognizes the value and the importance of it. And I was just wondering, given your mention of the critical importance of burial needs for our vets, and the fact that there's a density threshold now, this 170,000 veterans, and you do that by these 70-mile radiuses, if there's consideration of lowering that density threshold.
Well, sir, we're right. As of this year, I think we're going to be at about 88%. Well, our objective is to get to 90%, and then I think if we hit that strategic objective, then we start to look to how do we expand it and offer burial services to even a wider group of underserved veterans.
Well, that's what we're talking about, is how do you reach out to those rural areas, particularly. I mean, I'm very critical of the fact that in California, you kind of went up the Central Valley, and if you draw a 70-mile radius, you go from Nevada to the Pacific Ocean. Except there are very few people who live in the Central Valley. They all live along the coast, and we don't have any burial sites along the coast. And this Fort Ord is one where we're putting together a private-public partnership to have a state grant, and I don't need to consume the committee's time on that. The other issue that I was, and I just want you to be aware of it because I'll be working on it. I'm really intrigued by the fact that your former position as Army Surgeon General, you have the unique skill set of being in both DA and now VA. If you're going to be able to break down the stovepipes that exist between those two agencies, particularly as it comes for VA healthcare. And I wondered what changes you'd make in how DOD deals with the VA or vice versa. If you've got any ideas yet on how to break down some of those stovepipes.
Well, sir, I think the chairman acknowledged Secretary Mansfield. I mean, he has been working essentially a weekly meeting or twice a week meetings with DOD. I think there's been a lot of progress in this area. I think there's more to be made. I think we need to work our IT systems, and we've got, in March, I'm expecting to see the study come back to talk about our way ahead in terms of our combined IT systems. If you go out to North Chicago, and I haven't been there yet, but I'm going, where we are looking at a federal shared facility between VA, co-managed VA and DOD. There are a number of places around the country where that just makes imminent sense, and we need to really work through that North Chicago as a pilot to understand the issues. And there may be some legislative support that we need, we're not sure exactly yet, to be able to enable that kind of a cooperative effort. But I think there are great opportunities for us to move forward, and I'm very comfortable. I've met with the Secretary of the Air Force just recently, within the last 2 days, signed a joint agreement with the Secretary of the Army. So I think we can move forward. Just
Thank you. I'm
street.
pleased to hear that, and I look forward to working with you. That clinic at Fort Ord is just that. We still have about 7,000 uniformed personnel at the Defense Language Institute, at the Naval Postgraduate School, and some of the other military footprints there that trying to joint locate with the RCI, the residential communities, so that essentially the families of soldiers and the veterans can share in facilities. And that, I think we get a much better bang for the buck, so I appreciate your leadership on that. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for, I have a few more questions in the second round.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Farr. Mr. Dix?
Thank you, and General Peake, we're glad you're there, and we know you're a man of great skill and integrity, and yet this is a challenging job. And I don't know why, but for some reason, over the years, we've never done quite as well by the VA as I think we should have. And that last year was changed by Chairman Edwards just saying, hey, we've got to do better. And for some reason, we've underfunded this area. And I'm very pleased about last year's budget and this year's budget. But I am concerned about two things. In the out years, after 2009, and I can understand, and I'm not blaming you for this. I want to blame OMB. Let me blame OMB, okay? We see that, over the next 5 years, there is going to be it's $20 billion below the levels needed to maintain what the VA is doing today. Is that correct?
Sir,
It's below current services?
I've looked at that. My understanding is that is a calculated placeholder by OMB. The way we will build our 2010 budget is based on
What you think is really
forecast.
necessary?
Yes, sir. And I think we're getting better at forecasting. It is one of the things that we've been asked about in the past, and when I've looked at the data, I think we're getting better at being able to tell you what we are going to be asked to do in terms of work, and therefore be able to appropriately budget.
Now, Mr. Farr brought up the construction issues. It was, I think, $1.1 billion, I believe, Mr. Chairman, for this year, but it's reduced to $587 million. Now, we have concerns in the Pacific Northwest. Mr. Farr is concerned about California, rightfully so. We have concerns in the Pacific Northwest where we have seismic issues on some of our facilities, particularly at American Lake. And some of these projects, and I'm going to give, for the record, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit, there's 2 or 3 questions about local projects that I don't want to take the time of the committee today on, but these are of concern. But we have some seismic issues, and we're worried that if this thing gets delayed even further, at American Lake and at Seattle, we're going to miss. We could have a big event out there, which we've had in the past. So I hope you can take a look at those things. And the one thing that really bothered me in this whole discussion last year about Walter Reed and the VA is this transition. We were just talking about this, but it's so important to try to work out a way to make that transition. And I think the Army has the most difficulty here. And it's amazing to me how the Army, the level of benefits is at one level, and then the Navy and the Air Force are up here, and the VA's up here in terms of what these kids finally get. But the Army has lowballed this, and they can't get away with this anymore. But that transition from the Army Wounded Warrior units now over to the VA, when they've decided, they go through this process, they decide that he can no longer serve in the Army, there's not a place for him, and then he goes into the VA system. How's that working? I mean, are we getting, I know that's where we've added a lot of people to try to get that under control. Can you tell us how you think how that's working?
Well, sir, first of all, there is a pilot program that started on the 27th of November that where those wounded warriors going through the physical evaluation board, through the medical evaluation board to have their fitness for duty determined, will have the fitness for duty determined by the military. However, all of their medical exam for rating purposes will include not only the unfitting condition, but any potentially claimable condition. We will do that evaluation, and then Admiral Cooper has centralized the rating for that down at St. Petersburg, so they'll get a consistent rating. The military.
Is this just the VA, or is this the Army as well?
This is.
I mean, is there a way to have one evaluation?
That's the point. That's what this is. The
Okay.
VA does the physical evaluation and the rating. The military just takes the evidence and says, you are unfit or you are fit for military duty. If they're unfit for military duty, that particular unfitting condition, the rating that Admiral Cooper's people have done, will determine whether they have a severance or whether they get medically retired. So it's out of the hands of the military. It's one consistent rating with one medical examination process. So that is the pilot.
Because in the old days it was two. You'd go through the Army process, and then when you
Starting over,
if you were let go, then you'd go over to the VA and they'd start over.
Yes, sir.
So we're trying to put that together.
Absolutely, in this pilot. The other thing that we've done really is with the BDD program, the Benefits Delivery at Discharge program, that has been going on for some time, but has only really picked up steam with the OIF, OEF experience, and is that when a soldier, not necessarily being medically retired, but says, I'm getting out of the service and I've got some potentially claimable conditions, things that I want to get evaluated, then they can see a VA counselor 180 days before they leave the service. And the VA counselor, right there at the post-camper station, we do it in 153 different locations. That VA counselor can start working that claim, get the physical examination done, get them into a fast-track rating system, which we are doing. By the way, those are two of our paperless evaluation pilots, so that by the time the soldier gets home, we're shooting for 60, where I think our time has been about 85 days, but they get a check right away, as opposed to when they finally go home and then start to try to pull all the stuff together, all their paperwork, and then get adjudicated, where that can really stretch out. So I think we're making some progress.
And one final thing. I know that community-based outpatient clinics are sometimes criticized at OMB again, but I think these things really work. We have a situation in the state of Washington where we got the entire Olympic Peninsula, and a veteran at Nia Bay would have to get up at 2 a.m. in the morning to get to Port Angeles for the 4 a.m. departure to go all the way into Seattle. And we just got started out there, and I appreciate the VA's work on this, where they use the hospital in Port Angeles and the Coast Guard clinic. That's working very well. People really appreciate that. I think a full clinic would be better, and I put a bill in to authorize it and fund it. But to me, and we've had accidents on the roads out there. You get winter conditions. I think these things for remote areas should still be a valid consideration, and I know it's got to cost less than sending people to Seattle.
That's right.
Thank you.
We agree with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. Members, let me just mention there is some question right now on whether there is a quorum being maintained on the floor. Staff is checking to see whether some of us might need to go over to the floor for that quorum, but in the meantime, we'll continue on until we get a clear message. Mr. Wamp, with my personal apologies for the inconveniences caused you by this process between the committee and the floor, it's a privilege to recognize you for whatever time you'd like to take for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're a class act, and don't you apologize to me. But to you seven, we all apologize. We don't even really know what the rest of the afternoon is going to be like, but thank you very much for your time and your patience. And please remember, too, when I began, that I'm as green to this subcommittee as this carpet that someone picked out here over the last few months as we were sort of surprised to come back into this room. But this is new, and so when I start in a parochial example in that context, please understand I am not parochial, and I'll try not to be. Everybody that represents a district for 14 years has a lot of parochial interest, but I'm going to use this example as part of a bigger picture just to start on the front of reforms that I mentioned in my opening statement, Mr. Secretary. Because of CARES and some of the recommended changes with the CBOX and with areas of service that are not full and accessible, and Mr. Dix just talked about an example of travel. In my backyard, we have a very strong Chattanooga outpatient clinic, CBOC, that has been expanded, imaging, really servicing a whole lot of veterans in 18 counties, been listed as one of the top 5 areas that doesn't have a hospital, has a very strong outpatient clinic. And in CARES, they had recommended a couple of new CBOCs in that service area by 2012, but then I'm looking in the 5-year plan, and they're not there. And so I just wonder how the reforms of CARES are going nationally in terms of trying to meet some of the goals that you have, and then I'll follow up with another question you and I talked about in my office.
Yes, sir. Regarding CBOX and CARES, I think there were 156 new CBOX that were part of the CARES process. And we had the 64 that are going in, the 51 that are coming up in '09. My understanding is of that 56, there are 24 that have been decided really because of changing demographics or whatever are not needed. That would still leave 10 after 2009. And I honestly don't know if those
these fit
10
into that
are
category
yours
or
or not, but we'd certainly be willing to sort through that.
In a technical question, does the construction budget reductions affect even meeting the needs of these 10 or others?
So the CBOX are generally not major construction. In many cases, we're leasing, which I think is a smart thing to be able to do, because then you can shift if the population needs shift and change, and we've actually seen some of that. So it isn't necessarily tied. Now, there are CBOX that we have built, and in those cases, if it's under 10 million, then it's, in minor construction, it's over 10 million, it needs to be authorized as major construction.
Because I'm under my 5 minutes, I may come back to that later if the time allows and they go vote or whatever, because I've got other questions about the construction piece of it. But let me jump back to mental health for a minute, because we talked about this as well. There is a connection everyone understands between the mental health aspect of veterans care and the homeless population, which is in decline. And there are a whole lot of misperceptions about how many homeless people that are veterans are out there without benefits. But it is true, isn't it, that the benefits actually are there for these veterans, and in most cases, if the veteran would take advantage of the benefits, or if they might need medication to take care of any mental health issue that they have, they would then be in the capacity to go and seek the treatment, whereas we end up with quite a few in our homeless veteran population that they're either not on their medication, or they're incapable, or not coherent enough maybe to come in and get the care that is available under these kind of numbers, correct?
Sure, you're absolutely right. And I will tell you that we've had a push to get the homeless to be able to access their benefits. And so I think if you have the numbers, I was talking to Pete Dougherty, our homeless director, and he talked about 17,000 homeless recently that were able to access their benefits. I will tell you also, when I was out at the homeless stand down at the VA Medical Center here in Washington, D.C., I spent some time talking to our outreach person who goes under the bridges here in Washington, D.C. to try to identify homeless veterans and encourage them, pull them into the system, into the shelters and into the healthcare system. I think we've got 34 folks to sign up into our electronic health record that are homeless people that can access these things. So, and I believe I mentioned in my opening comments, there's in 2007 we spent about $1.6 billion on health care for homeless veterans. So, even though it's going down, it's still too many, but we are really aggressive in our programs, and we will continue to be.
I know the chairman's concerned about the research piece of this, and I haven't even studied the research flow well enough to understand all the aspects of how it might be used. But one thing that you and I talked about is this head trauma issue coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly Iraq right now. Such long-term consequences of that. Are we spending enough? Does this committee need to try to do more for the research today to determine where we need to be 4, 5, 6 years from now based on head trauma and long-term problems from stroke to, clots in the brain we talked about today, all the aftermath of this kind of IED damage to not just the troops that are hit, but the troops that are close to the troops that are hit?
Yes, sir. Well, our 4 polytrauma centers really started out as traumatic brain injury centers. I mean, that was their focus. Of the 487 patients that have come to our polytrauma centers from the active duty side, 460 of them, I think, really had predominantly traumatic brain injuries. I mean, so I guess my points are is that we have a long-standing and aggressive interest in this issue. Further, we're working very closely with DOD because obviously we share a common interest there, and you may have perhaps met General Select Lori Sutton, who's going to be heading there. We're going to provide a deputy to her to make sure that we can continue to integrate our efforts in PTSD and TBI. There about $252 million of our research budget is focused on these OIF, OEF issues to include TBI and PTSD, and really that's some where we are looking for the overlap there. So we have, I think, in mental health across the board, extramural funding this last year was about $100 million. So we do have a very strong interest in it.
Mr. Chairman, why don't I yield back and then come to me when you need to take time?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wamp. Mr. Secretary, back in 2005 and over a period of several years, one of the challenges we faced was that even though on a bar graph, the funding each year for the VA discretionary budget, and particularly VA medical care, was going up, it was not going up as quickly as the increasing number of veterans needing health care added to the medical inflation numbers, which I guess traditionally have been 200% higher than the CPI. Could you, and I know the VA has worked very hard on its modeling, and again, it's not an exact science. It's an art and a science, sure, and economics. But could you tell me how comfortable you are with the projections, and what assumptions did you make in the 2009 budget in terms of the increasing number of veterans needing health care, outpatient, inpatient? How comfortable you are with those projections within a certain parameter?
Sir, can I
and what inflation numbers did you use both for medical care and for construction?
Well, sir, I can talk to the medical care projection. Okay. If we could put that graph up. I know we've had sort of a history where our projections have been questioned, and maybe for good reason, So what this shows is the variance from the original estimate for each year going back to 2001. And what you see is, as we come to 2005, 6, and 7, we are within 1% of what was estimated. I mean, I asked the question because I want to be comfortable when I came to you that we had decent projections, and this looks to me like it is. Does this include, there's 12%, most of this is from Millman, which is probably the best medical actuary available, and they understand us and they know us, and so they've been involved with doing these projections. There's 12% or so that's outside of the Millman projection, but this number includes even that 12% that's outside. So we've been accurate even with those that have to be taken off model. So in terms of being able to come to you and say, I think we have some confidence in where we are going in terms of our projection, this gives me some confidence.
Track record certainly.
Yes, sir.
reflects
The other point I'd make is that even within that now, there's 333,000 OEF, OIF. We put some Kentucky windage in there because we want to make sure that we don't underestimate there. So we think we're going to have 14% growth, and we think we have budgeted 21% in terms of cost because we want to make sure that if something develops, we're ready to do it. And I think we are, again, if you have that other graphic, I mean, we've got, I think, confidence that we are going to not come in over the OEF, OIF folks. Just looking back now, back in 2005, 2006, my understanding is we may have missed it because we really didn't take it into account. But I think that we've got the data to really support what we're doing.
About the medical inflation factor, is that something that the VA must follow OMB dictates, or are you given the flexibility to estimate medical inflation? And if so, what factor did you use for?
Sir, my understanding is the number is 4.63% medical inflation, and as you know, we're 5.9% more than that. Really the augmented funding that you all gave us last year. So, even if you say that 4.63% of that is going to be taken up by inflation, we're still a couple of percentage points above that for new initiatives and so forth.
For medical care?
Yes, sir, for medical care.
Right. Okay. So 4.63%. Do we know what the private healthcare sector uses? Is that?
Sir, that is the national.
That is the national?
Yes, sir.
Healthcare inflation factor. Okay. Who sets that? Does anyone know? Dr. Cussman, would you know who sets the national healthcare inflation factor? Is that an independent private group?
I'm sorry, I don't know what company, but I think it's from
Millman. My experience in the Army is we look for Millman. I mean, they do it for lots of people, and they'll tell you, they measure it.
Okay. Could I ask you about the inflation factor for construction? We're seeing in highway construction, military construction, and some parts of the country, inflation is significant as 15%. And at least on the Milcon side of our subcommittee's responsibility, we learned a couple of years ago that the OMB magically dictated that military construction inflation would be 2.4% per year. It doesn't pass the smile test or the laugh test. Can you tell me what kind of factor you're using for your construction inflation?
Sir, I don't have that information. Perhaps somebody at the table does. I will tell you that we are concerned about the cost of cement, the cost of steel, and the cost of and the competition with people that actually can do the labor. And for us, it says, wait a minute, where in the future are we going to be running into billion-dollar hospitals, and who can afford them? And so going back to really Mr. Wamp's point and Congressman Dick's point, this issue of maybe looking at how do we leverage these CBOCs and a different model is going to be important as we look our way forward.
Does OMB require you to use a certain inflation factor for construction?
No, sir. Not that I'm aware of. And not that I'm aware of. We have a number of different commercial indices that range from between 23 and 37% from 2003 to 2007. But
So I'm just informed that we do market surveys of the local areas, and we use a locality factor as we project our requirements.
Have your estimates for your major construction projects, such as in Las Vegas and around the country, are those updated in the '09 budget using the best estimates, or are we going to have to make some adjustments upwards on those projects because of inflation?
Excuse me, sir. Mr. Neri, who works with our Office of Construction, says that this is, for the Las Vegas, we use the latest information, which was in '08 projection.
Las Vegas was funded in the '08 budget, and we used the best information we had from a current market survey at the time.
All right.
Recognizing that when we come into a budget, we are some time away from a contract award.
Okay. Well, maybe what I would ask you is just if you would monitor that. It's not the VA's fault that construction costs are going up significantly all across the country, and as we need to make adjustments in what the real costs are, it'd be nice to plan ahead, and if perhaps we need to build in for some of that before we pass the '09 budget through this subcommittee, maybe that would be helpful and we could work together on that. Mr. Farr, I know we have 7 minutes, 52 seconds. Would you like to take several minutes to ask any questions before we go? And then I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wamp to take whatever time. Would this vote be the vote that you don't need to so, okay, and you, Ms. Granger, can then take whatever time you want. Go ahead, Mr. Farr.
Thank you very much. I'll bet they'll love having us out of the room. My brother-in-law is disabled, and he's really worked hard, and I really want to thank you for your support. We finally got DOD to admit, one, that their golf courses have to meet ADA standards and therefore have to buy the disabled carts. And I think that's going to be great for vets all over the country, particularly those that have spinal cord injury. I don't know, it was last fall, DARPA had a demonstration downstairs in this building of what they're doing with this remarkable research on prosthetics. And I just wondered, I mean, your medical background, is VA doing anything to leverage the prosthetic research? I mean, we found that, one, it's not a big private sector research area because there's not a lot of market. It's very expensive research, expensive, labor intensive, and there's certainly not a market, big enough to support that. So it has to be a subsidized research. And I wondered if you've leveraged that with other federal agencies, DARPA and VA and others who might be involved, to provide our wounded warriors with the latest advances in that DARPA research and whatever research you're able to do also.
Well, DARPA has its own funding, and I've been involved with DARPA for a number of years in terms of their medical research. I know that they're into the myoelectric arms and the biofeedback mechanisms. I haven't seen their most recent stuff, but the collaboration between DARPA and DOD and the VA, I think, is.
So when this new technology comes out, it's very expensive. I think an arm was about $30,000. Is there an outreach to vets to how to? I mean, I don't know enough about production and all of that. Whether you call them in to get the training if they need that, or on a prosthesis.
It goes a little bit to what I was saying before about meeting the different needs of different veterans. I had something to do with the amputee center getting started out there at Walter Reed, because what I wanted was these young kids that are really should be being treated like world-class athletes, that have their whole life ahead of them, to have everything, every advantage that could go on. The VA's history then was more of taking care of the diabetic amputee that's, older, my age and older. And that's a different requirement set. So what I see us now is the fact that we are, we're merging our, that continuum of care. And we are leveraging contract support to make sure that our VA has everything that we need to be able to support these new myoelectric arms and all of the new computerized legs and so forth. So, and I would also point out, sir, you know, a lot of people think that there's thousands and thousands of these major there's about 701 at the last count of major amputees. So we can take care of them, and we can customize what we need to do for any one of them.
Well, that center you created, I visited. It's fantastic. That's where I got the idea, because you're training people on golf as a rehab, indoor rehab. But when they went out to the courses, they couldn't get on them. So it was.
Well, you ought to come to our.
We busted that.
Our winter games, and you'll see these young men and women out there skiing, and. You know.
So what the question I think goes to, because I also learned out there that that there was no resources to bring these vets back, or even active duty they could bring back. Vets, no, there was no money to fly you back to Washington to outfit you. And I thought that's just a dum-dum, that we couldn't pay for a plane ticket.
I agree with you more. I think that we've had some bureaucratic pieces there that we can overcome, given the numbers that we're talking about. And we will be, Dr. Cousins is already addressing those on a one-by-one basis, but we can do a better job of making sure that people are enabled to do the right thing.
Well, thank you. I like that answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now have 2 minutes and 49 seconds, so we're going to go vote. Mr. Wampa waited 12 years to get this gavel, so if you'll promise to give it back, I proudly give it to you and recognize you for continuation of.
I won't even touch it, Mr. Chairman. It'll be sitting right here when you get back. Thank you very much for the courtesy. What a pleasure. Secretary Peake, let me just say anecdotally before I ask a brief question and maybe move down the line here while the chairman is gone. You've been doing this 6 weeks? 6 weeks on the job?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I don't know of anybody with a life experience more well-suited for your position, and however the president talked you into doing this, I just want to thank you for accepting this service. I mean, you sit here as if you've been in this job for years because of your life experience, and it really is impressive. It's nice every now and then in the city to see a round peg in a round hole instead of a square peg in a round hole, which you see often. Back to the construction and the reforms, because I think in many ways this is at the heart of where we need to go. As I said to you, I was not as concerned about the president's budget request on construction as I was research, because I have somewhat of a built-in thought that veterans need as many options as they can possibly have on how to receive their health care. And that the notion that it has to be inside of a veteran's box, to me, is like a 20th century mindset, and we're in the 21st century. Number one, we've got all of, from telemedicine to, as you say, medical records and all these transitions with technology and information that would allow people, frankly, to receive their care in a much more efficient way than traveling somewhere to get it in a veteran's box. And that's my problem. Because a couple years ago, we had a bad wreck in a van driven by volunteers transporting our veterans from our outpatient clinic to the hospital 2 hours away. In very treacherous weather conditions, they have to go over the mountain, and it's one of those things that logic defies. Why would we do that? When, in fact, we have a $500 million public hospital in our city with available beds. And if a veteran had as an option, keep that veterans hospital in Murfreesboro, Tennessee open. Keep it open. Make sure that it's available so the veteran can go there if that's what they want. But if that veteran had a piece of paper in his hand that said, if I want to go to Erlanger Medical Center and get this care, it's going to be reimbursed at the proper Medicare reimbursement rate or whatever we decide, but that gives the veterans more options, and then you don't have to worry about steel increasing by 20% and concrete increasing by 30% and availability of construction products. So that's a reform that would make sense to me, empowering them to use the providers that are available to them, because their family can come see them. Their quality of life and their recovery is much better. This danger of transport is eliminated, et cetera. And is that the philosophy of CARES that I thought was part of the reforms in the VA?
So I think that we've got a ways and some constituencies to work with to be able to do that kind of good work. And there are areas that we are looking at that right now, in Harlingen, Texas, as an example, where we don't need a new hospital. We need to be able to take care of the folks locally, and if they need something that we can do better than anybody up in San Antonio, we'll move them. Columbus, we've got a Super C back there because of the operating rooms and day surgery programs that's about to open here September, I believe. We've got a great model for doing the kinds of things that you're talking about. And one of the things that we want to do is make sure that those veterans aren't just out there shopping, though, that they are, where we're paying for that care, that they're going to have the quality and that we can assure the quality and make sure that that information is part of their continuous longitudinal queryable patient record. And so there's some pieces to it that we need to work on, but I think it's a direction that we need to be.
And I don't want to lead you, but wouldn't you say that political decisions on veterans construction in the past has led to certain inefficiencies today?
One could ask why we have certain facilities in certain places. Yes, sir.
Okay, one other, and then I think Mr. Crenshaw will be ready. Blue Cross, for instance, which one of their big offices is in my hometown as well, really has a whole subsidiary now on IT and health records. Where is the VA compared to the private sector on this issue? As we make this a big issue today in your budget request, are we ahead or behind of the private sector?
Sir, we are far ahead of the private sector. Nobody has, I mean, at a local level, you may find a good patient record and so forth. When you look at Blue Cross and Blue Shield, mostly that's billing information. When we talk about clinical information, Dr. Cussman and the team that he has is leading the way. Now, do we have an issue? Yeah, we're on a MUMPS-based system. It is not web-based. We are going to need to migrate that system in the future, and that's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of dollars. And when we get that done, it's going to be even better, and it will allow us potentially to reach into the local doctor's office and allow them the opportunity to update the patient's record when we buy that care from them, or to, and we really need to look with DOD, because as we migrate, there's an opportunity for us to come together and do not necessarily the same system, but to have absolutely computable, interoperable medical information on our patients.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I want to thank my Republican colleagues for coming and attending this important hearing today, and yield to Mr. Crenshaw for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. You'll get thrown in the fire right away, and appreciate your service. I've got a couple of questions to start with that really relate to my district. And Dr. Cussman, when you talk about health, it seems like every year I kind of ask this question, try to get updated on a couple of things. One is the outpatient clinic that has been proposed for Northeast Florida. Everybody knows how important outpatient clinics are. We're kind of moving away, just like the health care arena is, from inpatient to outpatient. And 11 years ago, as you probably know, the decision was made to expand an outpatient clinic in Jacksonville, Florida, probably one of the largest populations of veterans, Northeast Florida and South Georgia. And it's kind of been I guess, a combination of change in plans, some bad luck with hurricanes, increasing the cost of construction, some political disagreements back in the community. But it's been 11 years, and people are so frustrated. And I kind of ask about this every year, and part of it, I guess, you can attribute to the general bureaucratic problems, but some of these things are maybe beyond y'all's control. But I guess I just it's almost embarrassing sometimes when people say, well, how are we doing on the clinic? And the plans are great, and they actually, the plans get better and better, but nothing happens. So I guess my question is, can you kind of give us an update on where we are, maybe any benchmark dates that you can give us some
you know, some encouragement as to where we are.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. As you alluded to, it is a long, drawn-out story of efforts and not getting to exactly where we want to be. As you know, we're going to increase the clinic about 30% in size. But to give you some dates, I think there's an end in sight here. And the dates that I've been informed that, you know, we've been working with the city. We very much appreciate what the city has done in the Shands Medical Center and others related to parking and all those different things. My understanding is that in March of this year, we will finalize the contract with Shands. And a few months later, we will issue the solicitation for offers. We're going to lease the property or have a developer develop it and not build it ourselves, and it'll be leased property. And then we hope that by next year, we will have awarded the lease, and this will be completed by September 2011.
And we're kind of on track as far as that goes?
I just got this today. If we don't make it, let me know, but
Right.
we'll monitor it.
Well, I'll see you again next year.
No.
But we got a few years, and that, but that is encouraging. I know it's been a combination of things, and but you can imagine what the veteran population just pretty frustrated. So thank you for that update. And the other is another kind of local issue, and as you know, we've been working on the. I guess I'll ask Undersecretary Turk about this. The Veterans Cemetery, which we authorized back in 2000, and we've made progress. We're, you know, went through all the site selections, environmental studies. I think we're about to acquire the land. And then there was originally, if the land is acquired, I think in this year's budget there's money to kind of fast track the construction. And the hope was that by the end of this year, if everything goes according to plan, that we could actually have the fast track take place, actually have some burial sites open by the end of the year. And so from your perspective, I try to talk to the city from time to time. I know that there's some negotiations going on, but could you give me kind of an update from your perspective on how we're doing, and can we get to that point in terms of the fast track construction and actually, because I know there's already someone there to kind of oversee the cemetery, so everything's moving in the right direction, but I just want to see what you have to say about where we are.
Happy to give you an update, Congressman. It is a pretty good story. We are on track. We don't yet own the site. As you know, the city of Jacksonville owns the 568-acre site that we're going to develop. We expect to have title to the property by the end of February. We haven't waited, though, to get title before we started design of the cemetery. In fact, we let the contract for design activities last August. I have some materials here I can share with you after the hearing if you'd like to see the sketches and drawings. It's not final yet, but we're well along. Right now, we anticipate breaking ground in August of this year, and we are on track. It's going to be close. It's going to be tough, but we are on track to have our first burials before the end of this year. Right now, we are scheduling December 2008 to have our first burials in the so-called fast track or the early turnover area. So we're moving along crisply. There's a lot that can go wrong, but so far so good, and it's my objective to get that cemetery open before this year is up.
Well, that's great news, and I've been kind of pushing the city. The city council is still, and I think they're on track to have that title transferred.
Appreciate that, and we appreciate your support and help. We had some issues to work out in terms of the boundaries, but we've resolved those things, and I think we're in good shape now. But if I may, we'll be in communication. If we could use some help in dealing with the city council, I'd like to be able to call on you if possible. Might also note that the cemetery director, one of my leaders in the construction business here, and a representative from the design firm, the AE firm that's designing the cemetery, is going to escort some of your staff members around the grounds on Monday. So you'll have a good feel through your staff about what this site's going to look like.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Crenshaw. The gentlewoman from Texas will be recognized, but let me say there's 13 minutes left in the first of 8 votes, suspensions. But the first one, we may be able to finish on this side, and then if Chairman Edwards comes back, we'll know, or he may email us as to what his intentions are based on probably an hour's worth of votes beginning now. But I think we have time for both of y'all, Ms.
Great,
Granger.
thank you. I know that we're all alarmed at the increase in seeing the suicide rate among veterans. There was recently a story in the Dallas Morning News about 2 veterans who committed suicide in the Dallas-Fort Worth area just within days of being released from the Dallas VA Medical Center. So I've got 2 questions. The first one is, what is the VA doing to determine what's causing this rise in the suicide rate, and of course, what steps you're doing to address it? The other part of it has to do with the percentage of those veterans who are members of the National Guard and Reserve. And according to the DOD data, approximately 28% of the forces deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan were National Guard and Reserve members. But a recently released report found that over half the veterans who commit suicide, half, were guardsmen and reservists. So I'd ask if you're also looking at that particular problem and what you're finding out.
Yes, ma'am. If I could address the second issue first. There's a, I know I'm familiar with this data, and what we did to get that data was to look at everybody that was separated from the service. That's of those that are separated from the service, those are the ones that become veterans, and then we can get information on. And really, that's about half and half, active and reserve. So, you still have a lot of active duty guys and gals on active duty. This study you're talking about, where we had 144 suicides, was about split between active and reserve. So, it really doesn't show that there's a much larger number among the reserves. It looks like it's about the similar, pretty close.
Thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am. The other thing is to tell you that we really are doing quite a lot about this, and we're very concerned about it, even 144. And when you really look at age match controls of the general population, it's not way out of bounds. If you just look at the young men in that cohort, it's similar to what the civilian population is. So it's not way out. But, you say, boy, these are our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and we shouldn't have anybody committing suicide, is what we'd like. So we've got the suicide hotline that has been put in place, 23,000 calls to the suicide hotline, about 400 rescues, 250 active duty members have called that, or in that ballpark. So, we feel very good about that has been put in place. Dr. Cussman has put suicide prevention coordinators in every single one of our medical centers. There's been a policy to train all of our VA employees about the issues of suicide. People get asked about, so they can get screened for that, as well as PTSD and TBI when they come in to see us. And so I think there is a concerted effort, and I think part of this outreach piece is to get people in. It's very interesting that study did suggest to us that you're less if you come in and avail yourself of be seen in the VA, that there's a lower incidence of suicide. Now, you got to look at the numbers and carefully in terms of statistics, but we want more people to come and avail themselves of our services, and so we want to push our outreach to try. There's been 1.5 million people deployed. About 800,000 overall have separated from the service. About 300,000 have come in to be seen in the VA. That's 500,000 out there that haven't yet, but we can see them under the way the rules are, and so we want to encourage them that need it, and educate their families to say, hey, you maybe ought to go. It's okay. We want to break down the stigma.
Thank you. And thank you for your service. I'm like Congressman Wamp, very impressed with your background and how much good you can do in the position you're in right now. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Carter?
Thank you. Thank you very much. First, let me thank everybody for being here, and what you do for the veterans is nothing more important, as far as I'm concerned, where I live, than taking care of our veterans and making sure they've got the best. I just got a question that came up last year. We talked about overpayment of benefits. Admiral Cooper, we talked about it last year, and at that time there was some indication that, and we had a follow-up visit about that also, that it really wasn't an issue at the time. But then in September 28th of 07, the IG report indicated that wasn't necessarily the case. This report stated that the delay on the part of the VA regional office employees resulted in $5.8 million for only 209 cases. There were an additional $481.4 million in overpayments, of which Veterans Benefit Administration staff could have avoided $50.8 million had they processed adjustments properly or promptly. VBA emphasis on incoming claims created a priority list, and adjusting existing claims was low on that list. And last year, this committee provided for 3,100 new claims processors. Now, in light of that information, first, I guess I'd like to know how many more claims processors are involved in this process out of that 3,100 than we had last year when we discussed this. How are these new processors helping address this backlog? And if the IG found $55 million in avoidable overpayments so easily, why is it that we were being told last year that this wasn't a problem?
I can tell you that we have looked into it, or are continuing to look into it. Yes, we're taking some of those people coming aboard, the 3,100. We have been hiring very fast, having gotten started on that at the beginning of, I guess, about January of last year. What it takes is a lot of training that we have to do to get those people to be able to be contributors to the total process that we have. Your question on overpayment itself, it's a matter of quality. It's a matter of what we do for training to ensure that we don't get that. We're trying to look at it very closely. It continues to happen. Hopefully we see it less than we have, but I can only assure you that we've continued to look at it and are doing a lot of training with these new people coming on board.
Well, you know, these overpayments create a crisis
Yes,
in
sir.
the veteran's life, because he gets overpaid, he operates on that money, and then he gets a notice that he was overpaid and he needs to reimburse. It creates a crisis for the veteran. I'm not trying to say I don't want to pay a veteran as much as I can get in his hands, but then to get him out there with something he owes the government and then tell him he has to put it back puts a crisis on the veteran and his family. And I've had quite a few in my district that have raised this issue with me, and it's caused real domestic crisis in their families with the wives and children. So that's why the question was asked last year, and I think it really needs to be looked at, because they got enough stress in their lives without having to deal with having to owe the government a bunch of money. And I think it's really important that we try to be accurate on that. So I just want to raise that issue again this year.
I appreciate it. It's, you know, it does talk a little bit to the complexity of our disability system and why we need to figure out how to simplify it. One of the things that we have done is put an RFI out for rules-based engines to start to get into this paperless process that I mentioned in my open remarks, so that we can start to have this stuff digitized with rule-based engines, and hopefully a more simplified system will be able to have more accuracy and more automated checking instead of just somebody looking at, you know, reams and reams of paper. So I appreciate the points.
Well, I thank you, and my whole point is to make sure that that veteran life is better. That puts a crisis in his life.
Yes, sir.
I thank you, Mr. Ranking Member.
Well, thank you. Now, we have 4 minutes left on this first vote. I'm going to go vote. The chairman has indicated from the floor that he does desire to come back. Hopefully, the remaining 7 votes will be reduced to 2 minutes each, which will shorten the time that you will have to wait. But Mr. Edwards and I will be back, so the committee stands in a very temporary recess.
Thanks, sir.
I'm still not going to touch that gavel.
Thank you.
And he slipped through. You know, he was in the office this year now, not down the river. Members? What are you talking about? Some of those came back. My former boss was one who offered some sort of position.
Oh, yes. He was right
Stepping
up
up to
there.
be super lawyer.
I know, I thought that was great. And just so
He just can't resist.
I know, he can't help himself, so,
Can't resist stepping in to be a lawyer.
yeah.
But at least he's a especially a member who some might assume.
It was, and I tell people, you know, that 6 years is a great organization, great he is such a good person to staff. And they're the reason this work. Who is not so responsible. Yeah. I know, we were spoiled over there. I mean, I can't help getting angry at him. Yeah, so we were lucky. I didn't know how good I had it, but.
I'll tell you, the folks that stayed on the committee staff, I'm sure the senator, boy, they're lucky. I didn't get a chance to formulate much of an impression of both when I was staff and perspective. It was very transition.
He's very impressive. Yeah, Billy, you know, Billy and I talked after I had left before he left, and he was amazing.
And Billy was, you know, he was crestfallen because he had a nice relationship with Larry.
Yeah.
Really earned his confidence.
Yep.
I'll tell you another thing.
It's a different, yeah, it's different.
Challenges of some kind of, you know, we're just taking a little what he is.
Yeah.
I remember now, that's what he asked. Don't just try to run that. Just remember he asked. Explain, justify.
Oh, yeah, I know. Steve's doing okay.
What's Ms. Granger?
She is, you know, she's a member of leadership, so that's a different, that's a different thing. She's a vice chair. And so her time is spent a lot more on that than Gary's going to. He did a lot of stuff. But she's been involved in that since very big. I don't remember.
That 54 million was an extrapolation. And they just, this is.
But I really enjoyed it.
You're doing everything.
Yeah, just about to see. It's a fun challenge. She's genuinely interested, which is great. And she likes to know what's going on. She, like you said, she doesn't want to know this institution and why that matters. What that means. And that's a lot of numbers. And it's challenging. Yeah, but it's great. She's great. So I've been there
No, I remember you and I went to that afterwards.
Oh, no, not at all. Oh, I didn't use her classes. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you're nowhere near. You didn't have to wear them for the reason I had. We got
But I want to make sure. Great to see you.
Committee on waivers, they all have the opportunity to waive, and a lot of them aren't waived. You know, if it's something that we